If you're home alone, don't answer the phone. Here's your look at NECA Toys Scream Ultimate Ghostface Action Figure. The icon of Halloween returns with this brand new Ultimate Edition action figure, featuring over 25 points of articulation and a real fabric cloak. First, before we get a face reveal, let's grab the tape measure and see how tall the Ultimate Ghostface stands. Now, the reason why we are actually, in fact, going back and looking at this figure again, I got a couple of requests from you guys to see if I could look at this figure again leading up to the eventual release of that new Ultimate Ghostface that we will begin from NECA Toys, I think within about a month or so. So I thought it also would be a good time to go back and maybe add some new commentary track to a figure that I really did praise the first time I had looked at him. Will I still be praising the figure again this time? I'll have to certainly stick around to find out. Ultimate Ghostface, though, stands about 7 inches in height, or the figure is going to be about 17.5 centimeters tall. Speaking of commentary, I think I even commented in the review of Ghostface the first time I looked at him that it was strange on the back of the packaging that they listed him as the icon of Halloween. Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily would have said Ghostface was the icon of Halloween when we already have an icon of Halloween. Here's what the figure looks like with the Halloween 2 Michael Myers. This is the Michael Myers package, by the way, along with Sam Loomis. I have also looked at several of the Ghostface. I think, in fact, I looked at all the Ghostfaces that NECA have released over the years, but I did want to bring in my favorite. Not necessarily from a face standpoint, because I do think that while there are things I don't necessarily like about this ultimate version of Ghostface, and of course we will be getting that newer one soon, I did think that the face was one of the better ones that we've gotten from Ghostface, but I did think, though, the hood was handled better with the retro cloth release here to his left. Jumping now over to the accessories, the come include with Ghostface, the figure has several knives. The figure has several swappable heads, the voice changer, and even a scythe. The scythe is actually a thrown-away scene, I believe, from Scream 4, in which that barn party that they all go to, Ghostface is walking around with a scythe. And I think in that scene, in fact, he's using, quote, the zombie mask, something that really never saw light of day until technically you could say that mask came back in Scream 7, the one that we just recently got. So we're going to be looking at all the individual accessories. I guess things first we'll start with. The figure comes included with his little voice box. Now, the voice box we've actually gotten, in fact, even with that retro cloth release, although the retro cloth was a little bit bigger than this one right here, it's cast mostly here in a kind of cream beige plastic. It's so small, and being very careful not to drop it on the floor, because this would be the kind of thing that once fallen to the floor, I'm sure I'm never going to be able to find it. So I'm just going to put that to the side. The figure as well comes with several knives. One knife that you may recognize right away is probably this one right here. This is his modified Buck 120. I don't know if you guys can actually see it or not. It looks like it has already been generously used. In fact, actually, all the knives that come included with Ghostface have already been used. This one has probably plunged its way into several victims' bodies, or even one victim several times. It looks like the blood has actually started to dry or coagulate in one area, and then still remains wet in some of the other areas. I think the only thing about the knife is that they didn't paint the end of it, because I think in the Buck knife, the Buck actually has a little bit painted silver on the end of the handle, but still a nice little recreation of the knife that he normally then wields. He also comes included with this knife too, and I think he would have also had this at one point in the movie. It looks like it's been, again, quite used, and I like the varying degrees of blood that's been dried on the end of the blade. Any one of these, by the way, can be held in his hand. The figure comes with some swappable hands. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And then the figure also comes included with a butcher knife. Something more you'd expect to see with Michael Myers, and yet comes included with Ghostface. At one point, he would have used this knife also as well. I like that he doesn't just simply come with the Buck 120, but he actually comes with some other knives as well. He also comes included, like I said already, this scythe. Now, the scythe is something I think is a thrown-away scene from Scream 4, if memory serves me correctly, in which he actually is wielding the scythe. The scythe, unfortunately, for me at least, broke one of the handles. While I was trying to fit this into his hand, I think it was this handle that ended up snapping off. If you look at it, though, there's very little plastic that attaches the handle to the rest of the main part of the scythe. So when you are putting this in his hand, for example, just be careful of these, especially because the grip that he has. In fact, it was actually this hand was the culprit. To try to get this into his hand is very tight quarters. It would always be best advised, and yet I didn't even listen to my own advice, to soften the hand first in hot water, just to soften up the plastic. From there, it was a lot easier to fit the scythe in there, but it would certainly say the first time you're doing it, you're probably going to be breaking the handle off. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you're probably going to break that handle off. The scythe looks good. It doesn't have any blood necessarily on it, so he's yet to use it, but I do like that the bird edge of it actually is a lighter color than the rest of the scythe blade. Nice little accessory. Not something I'm going to be necessarily displaying with Ghostface, but again, I always appreciate the fact that NECA includes the accessories that they do. The figure as well comes with some swappable hands. Gripping hands more so. In retrospect, I probably should have used maybe this hand for holding the scythe because it's just a little bit bigger. In fact, actually, this one is better suited for, say, holding the butcher knife. The plastic is pretty soft as well. That's a lot easier to pry this away from the palm. Whereas this one, unfortunately, has the fingers already attached to the thumb. It's next to, no, rather, it's impossible to pry the fingers away. So it's probably better to use, say, this hand, for example, for holding the knife, or this hand even to use the scythe. We'll put those hands and weapons aside. The figure as well comes included with 3 swappable head sculpts, depending on, pick your preference as to really how you want to have the figure displayed. A real argument, obviously, is always the case, to probably get another one of these Ghostface, or another 2, or another 3, or another 4. Although now that we are going to be getting that ultimate release Ghostface, you might very well want to hold off on getting this one and wait to get that one instead. But the figure, though, came included with 4 interchangeable heads. Obviously, the chalk white default head is the one that starts with this figure. But then if you have the option, you can also swap these out for the various different heads that we're also going to be looking at here. First, the figure comes with basically the same Ghostface mask as already, other than this one's just been generally splattered with blood. He has it all across his eyes. He has it all across his mouth. And of course, it's a really nice gory way to have the figure displayed. All of these, by the way, easily pop off the ball joint. I'll show you guys how that works in a second. But again, I really like this one. It may not, though, be my go-to when it comes to Ghostface figures, but I like the idea whenever they get the chance to splatter blood across the face of a figure. The figure as well comes included with the glow-in-the-dark mask, or you could say as well the stab mask. I just happen to have myself my black light here. I'm going to shine it across the front so you can kind of see, hopefully see. There you go. You can see how well that glows. Now, for me, it actually did absorb the light pretty good. There we go. Now, for me, again, being that this is a glow-in-the-dark isn't just the selling point for this, but more the fact that it actually looks like the stab poster mask. So I really like that. They probably even could have brightened this a little bit further and just done away with the whole idea of actually making this glow-in-the-dark and rather just made this a bright green mask like it would have been for the poster art for Stab. And then there's also this mask, which at one point would have been just a thrown-away scene. But now, had we not already got that ultimate release announced by NECA, could have easily been a serviceable stand-in for the Ghostface that we get in Scream 7. I can't even think the fact that we already have a Scream 7. Now, Scream 7, or is it Scream 6? No, backtracking a bit. Scream 6. Scream 6's mask, of course, is the older masks that the killer is now going around and tracking down. So we get the kind of chance to see not only the costumes, but all the earlier masks from the earlier films. And the more main go-to mask that Ghostface has isn't as much cracked and damaged as this one, but it's very similar. Now, we are going to be getting that ultimate release of Ghostface, I think, in the coming month or so. That's going to be a little bit more white and still has the cracks. It isn't going to be as dark of a brown as what we're getting right here. But again, if we didn't have that ultimate release, this would have been a great stand-in for right now to get that Scream 6 mask. I keep wanting to say 7. But if you wanted to change out the masks, first of all, we'll pick the figure up right here, and I want to show you guys what the defaulted mask did look like. Now, overall, I did like the mask. It does have, the varying nose is one thing that's a little bit different. Now, many people did comment that this looked like the original Fun Zone, the Fun Zone peanut-eyed ghost. I could see that a little bit. I mean, one thing about the nose is it's got a little bit more of a heart shape than I think the original Fun World mask would have had. I think the original Fun World probably would have been more triangular in shape. I think the eyes are nicely handled. I think as well the way they've sculpted the mouth looks good as well. My biggest thing really about this figure, and something though I didn't really mention too much about when we had this figure looked at the first time around, was the biggest issue was that the hood was too close to his face. There really isn't a way. I mean, you can't widen necessarily the hood front. It's always going to be really close in quarters to the rest of his face. And while maybe necessarily it's still a superior face from the Retrocloth release, I still think I like the hood a lot better on the Retrocloth figure. I also really like too, with the Retrocloth, that it had sort of more that sparkling effect that sometimes the Cloak would have had in the movie. It doesn't really have any of the Cloak or the sparkle. It has basically just more of a matte black finish. Now again, if you want to change the heads, it's just a case of rolling back and putting back the hood there, and then you're just going to grab the head and just remove it from the ball joints. Very easy to do. Let's say, for example, you wanted to use yourself the zombie mask. We'll just pop that in place. Now, any one of these, by the way, if you're having a hard time to pop onto the ball joint, you just heat the head in hot water. I probably should have even heated this a little bit more. At one point, I actually had planned in this review to put on the bloodied head, but I just decided at the last minute, I don't even have it all the way on there, but I'm just going to put the hood on right now so you guys can see how that looks like. I mean, really, the hood does keep everything in place. that if you didn't get the chance, like I didn't get the chance to get the head properly attached onto the ball joint, the hood does a good enough job of kind of keeping everything at bay. The thing only about it, though, is that the hood is way too close to his head. And eventually, when we do get that ultimate release that we are going to be getting again pretty soon, I hope that the hood is going to be a little bit bigger and wider than what we get. It doesn't look as bad from the side. Certainly doesn't look bad at all from either side. But from the front, it's just way too close to his face. There should be a lot more added spacing, gapping in between where the hood is and the inside of the mask, because it looks just too tight in quarters. Maybe one of the reasons why somebody said it's not really true in Ultimate Ghostface, as it's more the Ultimate Fun World Ghostface mask, or the Peanut-Eyed Ghost. But overall, like, again, it's a good-looking head sculpt. I still probably would go back to just the idea of going with the OG mask myself. But I like the idea that the figure came included with as many heads as it did. Let's right now at least pull back the hood. We're just going to pop the head back off. I did want to go back to kind of the basics. Let's pop this head back in place. I know I didn't necessarily heat this one, but this is the one that's been sitting on the ball joint this whole time. And let's just carefully put the hood back in place. If you are also wondering if the hood has a wire frame, the answer is no. It doesn't seem to have a wire frame, at least that I can see. But the biggest problem, again, is just sits, already mentioned, way too close to his head. For the rest of the figure's body, one of the biggest problems that had this figure plagued was the fact his elbow joint, I think, was prone to breaking. Now mine, knock on, I don't really have wood in front of me, but knock on wood, mine are still fine. The one thing that's the detriment to this figure is the fact that I think they actually glued the sleeves to the forearms. So even if you did actually break the joint on the elbow, there was really no way to roll the sleeves up. You can see that they've kind of glued them in place. So just be careful if you happen to pick this figure up and you've yet to really open them up. Just be careful to know where that joint is and know that there's restrictions right away when you guys get them first opened up. You want to just make sure that you're bending them properly in place, that if there is resistance, reluctancy, there's something telling you don't move any further. Don't move any further, whatever you do, in case that actually does break. Again, mine seems to be okay, but again, it's really hard when you can't get access to see where the elbow joint. You can kind of feel it. It's right there. There's the swivel joint that allows the arm to rotate and bend it back and forth, but there's really no way to actually see it because they've glued the sleeve in place. I did also want to show you guys the cloak. Now, the cloak is kind of more just an all dark black fabric. The fabric is pretty good, actually. It's kind of more of a stretchier material that they would have used, but it doesn't have sort of that glimmer and shimmer that the original masks, the original cloaks would have had in the movies. What it does have, though, at least, is it does have the little rags that he has coming out from the bottoms of his sleeves. And again, using sort of more of a stretchier material to get the job done. One thing that's also interesting about this figure is if you lift the robe up, you can kind of, first of all, see the inner workings of the figure. You can see where, first of all, his abdomen joint is, or the upper torso bend is. But you can also see as well, like, there's no lower trunks. Instead, what they've done, just simply because, again, the cloak's going to be covering over it anyways, they've just basically attached the legs by pegs. So when you are putting the figure, like, if you have the robe over top of it, you can kind of feel the rigid areas where there's no, like, it's kind of like a really bony, scrawny individual. Like, if you ever see somebody who's really, really skinny and it seems like their thigh bones are sort of sticking out, kind of the same similar thing. I don't know why I was using that as a comparison, but it's very similar when you actually look at Ghostface. Like, when you put the robe over top of it, you can kind of really feel like the bones are protruding out from the tops of his legs. Of course, from the lower half of that, he does have his just regular pants. He does have brown boots this time around, brown shoes this time around. And he does also have the peg holes on the undersides of the figure's feet. Now, for the figure's articulation, let's just put back, actually, you know what? I'm going to roll that back up in a moment, but first I want to go back to his head sculpt. The head sculpt's going to on a ball joint, so yeah, it does rotate back and forth, up, down, and all the things in between the upper torso. And actually, just before that, the arms do hinge out. Now, I'm going to tread very cautiously on this figure. I already know the limitations when it comes to this figure because I've already had it in my collection for a while. I had actually, at the beginning of this video, you noticed I kind of took everything out of the packaging just because at one point I had put this guy back in the card just because I was expecting to get that ultimate release, again, whenever it gets released. So, like, the figure does have a hinge in his shoulder, but it's really tight on mine. I'm not going to bend it any further than what it is right now. I'm getting about a 45. You probably could easily bend it more than 45. The arms do move forward and back. There is the bend at the elbow that allows at least the forearm to rotate back and forth, but just tread cautiously while doing that. Hands rotate all the way around. Now, again, I'm just going to, like, lift up the cloak so you guys can see sort of the inner workings of the figure. He has an upper torso ball joint, so yeah, that allows the top torso rotate fine and good. But he doesn't have any waist swivel. You see, like, it's just basically a stock block of plastic. The legs do hinge out. They're on ball joints. You can see there as well. It does swivel at the top of the thigh. The figure does have a bend in the knee that only allows the lower leg to rotate back and forth. And there, of course, is an ankle pivot up and down this way and back and forth this way as well. There's things I like about this figure. Overall, I think he does things better than he does things worse. The things I'm not necessarily keen on is not necessarily the face. I think the face is handled well. Some would say that this isn't a true likeness of Ghostface, but I think it's close enough. Some would also say they looks and more resembles the Fun World peanut-eyed ghost. I don't see that. I mean, obviously, there are people that are a little bit more dedicated to the details when it comes to Ghostface and could really rhyme off the differences between all the Scream movie masks. But for me, at least, it gets the job done when it comes to Ghostface. My biggest issue necessarily isn't the face. It isn't even the elbows. I didn't have really any issues with the elbows. My biggest thing is the fact that the cloak hood sits way too close to Ghostface's face. If only they had allotted a little bit more space, and again, I only use this as the comparison, while it isn't as good of a face as I feel with the Ultimate release, I feel like, again, one thing that was done better on this release is the material that they used for the cloak and how much allowance they gave to the cloak hood. Now, I'm sure it's probably rather redundant for me to say this figure's worth picking up when we all very well know we are going to be getting ourselves a version 2 Ultimate Ghostface pretty soon from the folks over at NECA Toys. Is it still worth to go back and try to track this figure down? I don't know. I mean, honestly, for me at least, being a fan of the Scream franchise and the Ghostface figures that we've gotten over the years from NECA, I think if you are one that still is a completionist, I still think it's worth to go back and try to track this one down. I don't think necessarily it's worth to say go on places like eBay and pay some crazy prices if the scalpers or sellers at the time. They're not always scalpers, just people that are looking to part ways with their things. If they are selling them for too high of a price, let's say, $100 for this figure, maybe not. If you can find him for the price that he was going for at the initial time, probably like $35 to $50 in the first place, and you are a fan of like getting all the Scream figures, then yes, I think it's still worth getting this guy. He does have the benefit of the scythe, for example. He does have the benefit of all the accessories, not to mention the 3, now actually counting 4 swappable heads, of course, including the defaulted head that he has on his neck right now. 4 interchangeable heads. Now, the Ultimate Ghostface that we are going to be getting has a lot of that same stuff anyways. So, of course, when we eventually do have a look at that figure, I will be bringing this guy back out, and we'll obviously do the rightful comparisons between one Ghostface and the other. Still, though, I like the look of this one. I mean, obviously, it was plagued with some problems with his elbows, for example. I don't have problems with my elbows, not my elbows, but the elbows of Ghostface. And I still had also the problem with the one thing with the scythe. The scythe handle was very prone to breaking. I broke mine. I ended up having to glue it back in place. No harm, no foul. The thing also about this Ghostface is the fact, as already mentioned, beating a dead horse, I'm sure already, is the fact that the hood was just way too close in quarters to his face. If only the hood was just a little bit more allotted space, a little more gap, a little more baggier on his head, I think it would have been a better looking Ghostface than maybe what I had said in this review. It's still a nice looking Ghostface, but I'm still anxious to see what we're going to be getting with that Ultimate version 2 Ghostface when he eventually does get released. What do you guys think of this figure? Let me know down below in the comments section. And are you excited to get that new Ultimate version 2 Ghostface when he does eventually get released? If you have already gotten this figure as well, if you already have had this figure in your collection on your shelf, let me know if you've had any issues with him. Now, I know, again, he was plagued at one point with real problems with his elbows. Many collectors had said that their elbows had snapped on their Ghostface. Was yours one of the casualties? I hate to bring up, the old bad memories, but let me know down below in the comment section if you had any problems at all with this figure. As well, if you guys enjoyed this video, want to hit with a like. If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing, and you certainly do want to stick around for more, we will be, by the way, looking at a whole lot more NECA stuff. That's always the thing that comes back. I like to think that you guys are coming back to this channel for, but always sprinkled in there amongst all the other NECA things I'm looking at, there's always new content coming your way. So making sure, yes, you're hitting that subscribe button down below, that yes, you're turning on the bell notification, and that yes, you're making a promise to come back to this channel. Popping up also, by the way, at the very end of this video, if you did want to go back in time to see all the other things I've looked at Ghostface related, popping up at the very end of this video will also be specifically a Ghostface playlist. Feel free to give that a gander. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.